It started with coffee, the kind that never really tastes right unless someone else remembers how you take it. She worked the morning shift at the cafe near the bus station, not because she needed to, she once said, but because she liked having somewhere to be. I was there most mornings before work, pretending to read whatever paperback was in my bag, watching her hands move like she was building something invisible. "Medium latte, 1 sugar, no lid?" she asked once, without looking up. I nodded, caught off guard. "You remember that?" "I remember people," she said, and slid the cup toward me. Her name was Marianne, though most people just called her Mrs. Lane. She was my friend Ethan's mom, the kind of woman everyone respected because she kept her life orderly in a world that didn't give her much reason to. Mid-40s, light brown hair always half pinned up, an easy voice that carried even when she wasn't saying much. I never thought much about her before that fall. Ethan and I had been friends since high school. He moved out years ago. She stayed. And somehow, I started showing up at that cafe more often than I meant to. Some mornings, we'd exchange a few words. Other times, she'd just give a small nod, like she understood the unspoken agreement between two people trying not to say too much. I'd sit by the window, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the same half-written message. "How's your day going? Want to grab coffee later?" Forget it. I'd delete them all. Every time. There was something in the way she'd lean against the counter during slow hours, tracing the rim of her cup, eyes distant, like she was waiting for a memory to leave her alone. And I wanted to ask, "What is it you're thinking about right now?" But I never did. The day it shifted was stupidly ordinary. Late October. Rain streaked the windows, the kind of gray that makes everything sound softer. The cafe was half empty. The air smelled like cinnamon and wet coats. She came over to my table during her break, holding a mug instead of her usual paper cup. "You don't talk much for someone who comes here every day," she said, sitting across from me without asking. I smiled, awkward. "You don't talk much either." She tilted her head. "Maybe that's why we notice each other." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. I started helping her close the cafe on Fridays. It wasn't official. She'd just sigh around 6, glancing at the chairs that still needed stacking, and I'd stand up before she even asked. "You don't have to," she'd say. "I know," I'd answer. And that was enough. The routine became its own kind of secret. The smell of disinfectant and leftover pastries, her humming quietly under her breath, the low rattle of spoons as we cleaned up. She'd hand me a dish towel like it meant nothing, but it always felt like more. One evening, she mentioned her son, my friend. "Ethan called," she said, wiping down the counter. "He says you're doing fine. Still can't believe you're old enough for a real job." I laughed softly. "He still calls me kid, doesn't he?" "Always," she said. "But I guess we all need to keep someone young in our heads." Something flickered behind her voice, a mix of fondness and fatigue. I wanted to ask if she ever got tired of being the steady one, the one people leaned on. But that felt too intimate too soon. Later, when the last customer left, I noticed her struggling to lift one of the heavy crates of milk cartons. Here. It changed again without warning. Like the tide, quiet, gradual, but definite. For weeks, our evenings had been a kind of rhythm. Closing the cafe. Her humming. The sound of rain against the window. Then one Friday, she wasn't there. A note on the counter. Took the night off. "Don't wait up, Em." I read it 3 times, like the handwriting could tell me what it meant. It didn't. The next morning, she was back. Same calm tone, same faint smile, but something behind her eyes was cautious. Like she'd thought too much and decided distance was safer. "You didn't come by yesterday," I said, pretending to sound casual. She poured my coffee. "You noticed." "I usually do." That earned a small look. Not quite a smile. Not quite nothing either. We both kept talking, but not about what mattered. She told me the cafe lease was ending soon. Owner selling, might move out of town. I nodded, pretending to care about real estate. Inside, my thoughts were louder than her voice. If she leaves, then what? Would I even say anything? A customer came in, an older man, gray coat. It was late, the kind of evening that smelled like wet pavement and salt. The cafe had closed early for inventory, and she offered me a ride home. The roads were quiet. Only the sound of tires on gravel and the faint static from the old car radio. She drove with one hand on the wheel, her thumb tracing the seam of the leather like she needed something to do. "You don't talk much lately," she said after a while. "You either," I answered. Her mouth curved, not a smile, more a quiet acknowledgement. When we stopped at the overlook, the one where the ocean blurred into night, she turned the engine off. Neither of us moved to get out. "Sometimes," she said finally, "I forget what I wanted before everything got practical." I watched her fingers tighten around the steering wheel. She wasn't talking to me, not really. Just into the dark. "What did you want?" I asked. She exhaled. "Something that didn't make sense." Then she laughed softly, like she regretted saying it. "And now look at me. Talking like I'm 20 again." The air between us thickened, not heavy, just close. "I don't think wanting something wrong always makes it wrong," I said quietly. She turned to me. Her face was half lit by the dash glow. For 3 days she didn't come to work. No note this time. No explanation. Just silence that stretched into habit. I went by the cafe anyway, out of routine, I told myself, but the new girl behind the counter didn't know how I took my coffee. Didn't know me at all. When Marianne finally reappeared, it was a Thursday. She looked the same, but quieter. Her hair was pinned tighter than usual. Her eyes were rimmed with the kind of fatigue you don't get from sleep. "Everything okay?" I asked, voice lower than I meant. She hesitated, then nodded. "My ex-husband was in town. Unexpectedly." "Oh." I tried to sound neutral. Failed. "He came by the house," she added. "Wanted to talk about our son. Finances. Nothing dramatic." She said it like a report. But the way her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter gave her away. I wanted to ask if he'd stayed long, if they talked about anything else, but the words tangled and died before reaching my mouth. I stopped showing up the next morning. Not out of anger, just confusion. Everything felt off balance now. The easy rhythm we'd built had turned into something I couldn't step back into without looking like I'd misunderstood everything. Still, I caught myself walking past the cafe on purpose. Just far enough to see her through the window. Sometimes she looked up, as if she felt it too, the noticing. Sometimes she didn't. I wrote a message one night. "I hope you're okay. I didn't want to disappear. I just don't know where to stand anymore." I didn't send it. I watched the cursor blink until the screen dimmed. A week later, I saw her at the grocery store. She was alone, hair damp from rain, scanning the shelf like she couldn't remember what she came for. She saw me too. A small, startled pause. Then a faint smile. "Hi," I said. "Hi." We both reached for the same carton of milk, cliché maybe, but real, and our hands brushed. She pulled back first. "Take it," she said softly. I wanted to say I don't care about the milk. I wanted to say I missed you. I just nodded instead. When I got home, the rain started again, steady and relentless. I poured the milk into a mug and didn't drink it. The silence in the kitchen was thick enough to taste. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. It was almost winter when she came by. I wasn't expecting it, a knock on the door, faint but certain. When I opened it, she was standing there holding a thermos. The same steel one I'd seen behind the cafe counter for months, the one she always filled before closing shift. "I made too much coffee," she said, voice even, eyes tired. It was the kind of lie that sounded gentle enough to believe. I stepped aside. "You can come in." She hesitated at the threshold, rain dripping from her coat. Then she did, slow, careful, like she was stepping into something she didn't quite trust herself to want. We sat at the kitchen table, the thermos between us. The air smelled faintly of coffee and wet fabric. She looked around the small apartment, the stack of dishes, the undone laundry, the half-read book on the counter. "You live like someone who hasn't decided to stay," she said softly. I smiled. "Maybe I haven't." A pause. She nodded like that made sense to her. "I've been thinking," she started then stopped. "About the cafe. About that night in the car." I looked up. "You don't have to explain. I think I do." She pressed her palms flat on the table, then lifted them again. "You were kind to me when I didn't know how to be seen anymore. I started looking forward to it. Maybe too much." Her voice caught, not in a dramatic way by spring. The cafe had closed for good. The sign was gone, windows covered in paper, the bell above the door silent for the first time in years. I passed by one morning, the air still cold enough for a jacket. There was a notice taped to the glass, for lease. I stood there longer than I meant to, watching my reflection fade in the morning light. A few blocks down, I saw her. Marianne. Same coat, same calm pace. She was carrying a bag of groceries and that same steel thermos hooked through her arm. She saw me too, stopped, smiled a little, like the pause between us was no longer heavy. "Coffee?" she said, lifting the thermos slightly. "Always," I said. We sat on the bench near the waterfront, the same one we'd passed 100 times and never used. She poured coffee into the lid and handed it to me. It wasn't the best coffee. It never was. But it tasted like something steady, something real. She told me she was managing a small bookstore now. "Fewer dishes," she joked. "More quiet." I told her I'd finally taken a job in town, not much, but enough to stop running. For a while, we didn't talk. Just listened to the gulls, the wind, the sound of small waves against the rocks. At 8:47 a.m., the church bell rang in the distance, the same time I used to walk into the cafe every morning. We both noticed. She laughed softly. "You're still early for everything." "Not everything," I said. There was no big moment, no speech. Just her hand resting on the bench between us, mine close enough to feel the warmth. The kind of nearness that doesn't ask for permission anymore. I glanced at her thermos. Dented, the paint chipped near the handle. "You still carry that thing everywhere?" "Old habits," she said. Then, after a beat, "Some are worth keeping." The sky was turning brighter now, the sea catching streaks of sunlight. She leaned back, eyes half closed, and I realized we hadn't changed the world, or each other, in any dramatic way. We just stopped pretending the quiet didn't matter. It wasn't a love story anyone would notice. But it was ours. Later, when she stood to leave, she didn't take the thermos with her. Just a small glance over her shoulder, like a question that didn't need